boyfriend, Madonna. The Flashy Girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
They were the shows that raised us, echoed through our living rooms, and then vanished like they never mattered. What happened to the TV we loved? When did it become something we forgot to remember? Step by Step was the kind of show that did not just mirror your living room, it felt like it was your living room. This was the 90s heartfelt answer to all the chaos of family life, with just enough sitcom sparkle to make it feel like everything would work out in the end. A blended family thrown together by love and sheer circumstance, complete with kids who never got along, step-siblings who did not share toothbrush space without a Cold War, and two adults trying to make it all look easy. It was clunky, it was chaotic, and it was real. Everyone had a character they could relate to, whether it was Nerdy Mark, Tomboy Al, or that one weird cousin who showed up uninvited and never left, but somehow Step by Step just vanished. A few reruns here and there, but no fanfare, no final salute. In a world that still obsesses over family sitcoms, why did we leave this one behind? The humor was clean, the messages sincere, and every episode ended like a warm hug. Maybe that is the problem. In a world getting sharper and meaner, Step by Step felt too soft to survive. But there is something powerful in that softness, a version of family that was messy but hopeful, something we did not know we would miss until we lost it. Hangin' with Mr. Cooper was more than just a sitcom. It was a vibe, a rhythm, a heartbeat of early 90s cool. Set in Oakland, California, and starring the smooth, towering Mark Curry, the show felt like that one teacher you could actually trust. He was a former basketball player turned high school coach and math teacher, but more importantly, he was the kind of adult figure every kid watching wished they had in their corner. He cracked jokes, dropped wisdom, and danced through his own mess of bills, roommates, and dating life. And yet, just like that, the show faded. It slipped through the cracks of rerun schedules and syndication rights, its legacy drowned out by louder, flashier sitcoms. Maybe it was too grounded, too real. It captured a specific kind of black excellence without making it feel like it had something to prove. It was not flashy like Fresh Prince, nor squeaky clean like Full House. It was something in between, authentic. Now, all that is left are the memories of Friday night laughs and that silky theme song that changed with every season. Do we miss Mr. Cooper because of what it was? Or because of what it reminded us we once had? Dinosaurs was the weirdest thing on television, and that is saying something. A sitcom about a prehistoric family of full-body animatronic puppets who wore sweaters, watched TV, and yelled at their kids like any other suburban household. It was bold, it was absurd, and it worked. Dinosaurs did not tiptoe around real issues. It sprinted into them. From environmental collapse and corporate greed to women's rights and toxic parenting, the show wrapped all its messages in a colorful, foam latex fever dream. And somehow it got away with it. It became a cultural phenomenon. Kids loved Baby Sinclair's catchphrases, parents chuckled at the satire, and everyone kind of forgot it was on primetime network television. But when it ended hard. That finale? A quiet, cold apocalypse with snow falling and silence settling in. The last joke was that there were no more jokes. The show was never revived, never rebooted. It just fossilized, an artifact of a time when television dared to be strange and smart all at once. Today, it would be too expensive, too risky, too thoughtful. What kind of show makes you laugh about extinction and then sit in silence? Dinosaurs did, and that is why we never really talk about it. It still hits too close to home. Dr. Quinn. Medicine Woman felt like something your parents watched, until you sat down and realized you could not look away. It was soft-spoken and slow, but that is exactly where it got you. Jane Seymour, as Michaela Quinn, a Boston doctor dropped into the rugged, often hostile terrain of the Colorado frontier, was a revelation. It was a show about healing, but never in a shallow way. It talked about racism, sexism, war trauma, and spiritual crisis long before prestige drama was a label. And the audience came back week after week because they saw something they did not get anywhere else: a woman leading with strength and softness. It aired when the world was changing. When roles for women on television were often one note, Dr. Quinn demanded more. But the world changed again, and the show's gentle pace and moral compass fell out of fashion. It became too earnest, too idealistic for modern tastes. Now it is barely mentioned, despite its groundbreaking heart. Maybe we forgot it because we needed to. Maybe the world moved on from hopeful stories set in dusty towns. But there was a time when Dr. Quinn's quiet compassion held the whole frontier together. And maybe, just maybe, we need that kind of story again. Picket Fences was television trying to whisper the truth into our ears, while also hitting us in the face with how bizarre small-town America could be. It was not afraid to be strange. In fact, it insisted on it. A sheriff in a town where nothing ever made sense, doctors who dabbled in the unexplainable, and courtroom scenes that felt like confessionals from the American subconscious. It was dramatic, yes, but also absurd. One week was a murder case. The next was a cow giving birth to a human baby. And yet, somehow it worked. The writing was sharp, the acting top tier, and the themes always tangled with morality, justice, and what it really meant to be American in the 1990s. It was Twin Peaks without the surrealism, or maybe The Twilight Zone dressed up as a legal drama. But shows like that do not last long. Too strange for mainstream, too thoughtful for casual viewing. It flickered out like a street lamp in a foggy town square, there one moment, gone the next. And what we lost was more than a show. We lost a mirror. Because Picket Fences was never really about small towns. It was about how weird, broken, and beautiful we all are underneath the surface. The Pretender was the kind of show that made you question how much of yourself was ever really yours. It followed Gerard, a genius who could become anyone, a doctor, a pilot, a lawyer, a criminal, just by studying them. But he was not doing it for fun. He was running from a secret facility that raised him like a lab rat and used his gift to build weapons, manipulate lives, and rewrite truths. Every episode was him helping strangers, exposing injustices, and trying to track down the family that was stolen from him. That idea of becoming someone else to find out who you really are was haunting and quietly brilliant. The show was packed with paranoia and emotional wounds that never healed. Gerard's innocence, despite everything, was what kept us hooked. He wanted to belong, to feel human again, even after being shaped into a tool. He was a mirror for anyone who has ever worn a mask just to survive. Each new identity was not just a disguise, it was a desperate search for pieces of himself. The show asked whether empathy could be engineered, and if it could, whether it still counted as real. In the end, The Pretender was less about escaping a secret lab and more about escaping loneliness. But The Pretender disappeared almost as mysteriously as it arrived. It was shuffled off television with barely a conclusion, left behind in a world that no longer had room for subtle, slow-burn storytelling. We never found out everything. We never got true closure. Maybe that is why it hurts more. Because the story was about a stolen life, and in the end, even the show was taken too soon. Profiler came in like a storm, dark, pulsing, and almost too real. This was not your polished, network-friendly crime show. This was blood under fingernails, voices in the dark, and a woman carrying the weight of too many minds inside her own. Dr. Samantha Waters was not just a forensic psychologist. She saw what killers saw. She felt what they felt. And it broke her, piece by piece. Each episode dragged her deeper into other people's nightmares, and somehow she kept walking, strong but unraveling. It was one of the first shows to center a woman with real psychological depth, one who was brilliant, damaged, and believable. Her empathy was both her weapon and her wound, and you felt every cut. She did not catch killers from a safe distance. She stood in their shoes, and it nearly destroyed her. Profiler did not glamorize darkness. It showed how terrifying it is to understand it. And at the heart of all that horror was a woman who still believed that truth mattered. Long before the genre exploded, Profiler was building the blueprint. But it got lost in the noise, buried under newer shows that borrowed its formula and polished it until all the raw edges were gone. Samantha's story was never wrapped up properly. Her pain, her brilliance, her strange gift, it all faded without warning. And what we lost was not just another crime show. We lost a voice that whispered the darkest truths of the human mind before we even knew how to listen. Early edition felt like magic without the wand. A man wakes up every morning to find tomorrow's newspaper on his doorstep. No explanation, no guidebook, just a cat. And a second chance to stop something terrible from happening. Sometimes it was a fire, a car crash, a suicide. Sometimes it was something small, but still life-changing. Gary Hobson was not a superhero. He was just a guy in a trench coat trying to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. There was a sweetness to it, a gentleness. It did not ask what you would do with power. It asked what you would sacrifice for someone else's peace. Gary's gift was not flashy. It was quietly terrifying, a moral weight he could never put down. And every missed opportunity, every failure to stop what he saw coming, felt like a personal loss. It made heroism feel like a daily grind, not a grand gesture, and that felt more honest than any cape ever could. Every episode asked, what would you do if you had the power to change someone's fate? And then it asked again, and again, until it stuck in your chest like a quiet ache. But early edition was too soft for what came next. As television got darker and edgier, its calm optimism felt out of place. It was never flashy, it never shouted, it simply tried to be good, and that made it unforgettable, even though it has been almost completely forgotten. Maybe we need that newspaper now more than ever. Sliders was a what-if question that never stopped growing teeth. What if you could travel to parallel Earths, not in theory, not in dreams, but really, step through a portal and wake up somewhere just a little off? The Golden Gate Bridge is blue. The United States lost the Revolutionary War. Everyone worships lawyers. The possibilities were endless, and so were the dangers. Quinn, Wade, Rembrandt, and Professor Arturo started out chasing knowledge, but ended up running for their lives across worlds that looked like ours, but never quite were. Sliders was fun until it was terrifying. It touched on totalitarianism, racism, surveillance, identity, even genocide, all wrapped in the skin of a science fiction adventure. It dared to ask how many versions of yourself could survive the worst versions of your world. Each slide was a gamble, not just with their lives, but with their souls. There were no guarantees, no safe reset, just a flicker of light and the hope that the next world was kinder. And somewhere along the journey, the real danger stopped being the places. They became the people you could turn into. But like many great shows, it lost its grip. Cast members vanished. The writing changed hands. The stories got messier. And still, it limped on, trying to recapture the awe of that first slide. Eventually, it was just gone. One last portal that never opened again. We loved Sliders because it reminded us how thin the line is between the world we know and the world we fear. And because deep down, we always wonder, what if we took one step to the left? seaQuest DSV dove deep when everything else was looking up. Set in the near future, it imagined a world where the ocean floor was the new frontier, and humanity had only begun to understand its mysteries. The seaQuest was more than a submarine. It was a floating laboratory, a political tool, and a second chance for a broken world. Led by Captain Nathan Bridger, a grieving man who left the military to find meaning in science, the show tried to mix hard tech with heartfelt ethics. And somehow, it worked, at least for a while. There were talking dolphins, underwater colonies, alien viruses, and ethical dilemmas wrapped in coral and steel. It was part Star Trek, part marine biology fever dream, and part slow-burning family drama. It imagined the future not as conquest, but as reconciliation, with nature, with science, with ourselves. Its quietest moments watching the deep pulse with life, were more powerful than any explosion. It showed that exploration did not have to mean destruction, and that leadership could be rooted in grief, not ego. seaQuest was never about escape. It was about confronting the unknown with empathy instead of fear. But like most shows ahead of their time, seaQuest was never truly understood. Ratings dipped, rewrites came fast, and eventually the soul of the show got drowned in explosions and budget cuts. It was a story about hope beneath the surface, about learning from the deep instead of fearing it. But hope is hard to sell, especially when it comes in the form of a show that refuses to stay shallow. seaQuest sank quietly, but it left something behind, a blueprint for a future we are still too scared to build. Lois and Clark. The New Adventures of Superman was the superhero show that asked a question nobody had dared to ask out loud. What if the strongest man in the world was just a guy in love? This was not about capes and cosmic stakes. It was about glances across a newsroom, about clumsy flirtation in a city that never slept, about a man who could fly but was still afraid of telling someone how he felt. Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher brought a heat and humor to Clark and Lois that made them feel more real than myth. He was not the alien savior. She was not just the damsel. They were two adults trying to trust each other and themselves. For a moment, this show had the perfect balance. The villains were cartoonish, but the emotions were not. It was one of the few shows that dared to ask if love could be just as heroic as strength. Every look they exchanged carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths, and that tension made it irresistible. Instead of saving the world, Superman was trying to save his own heart, and that felt revolutionary. In a sea of stoic heroes, Clark Kent reminded us that vulnerability could be its own kind of power. And yet, just as it hit its stride, the world changed. Audiences wanted darker, sharper, slicker. And Superman, this version of him, was just too kind, too wholesome. He was not tortured enough. So the show faded, with barely a thank you, like a love letter someone stopped rereading. But for those who remember, Lois and Clark was proof that the biggest leap of faith is not taking flight. It is telling someone who you really are. Touched by an Angel was the kind of show you did not admit to watching until you needed it. And then you could not stop. It was quiet, unashamed, filled with messages that felt too raw for irony and too sincere for sarcasm. Every week, someone would face something too heavy to carry alone. And then Monica would arrive, a red-headed angel sent by God, not to fix everything, but to remind people they were not forgotten. It sounds cheesy now, maybe even naive, but at the time, it filled a silence no one else was addressing. Addiction, death, abuse, doubt. It gave people permission to cry over things they had buried too deep. It said that suffering did not make you weak. It made you worthy of compassion. Every episode was like a gentle hand on your shoulder when you needed it most. In a world that often feels too loud to hear anything soft, this show was a whisper that still echoes. Touched by an Angel did not pretend to solve these things. It just sat with you while they hurt. That kind of tenderness does not trend well. Eventually, people rolled their eyes. They wanted grit, not grace. And so the show disappeared from syndication, its memory wrapped in Sunday night nostalgia and family room prayers. But somewhere deep down, we still long for that voice in the dark that says, "You are not alone," even if we do not want to admit it. Sisters was not flashy. It did not have capes or cops or crime scenes. It had something rarer, conversations, the kind that happened late at night in kitchens, on back porches, in hospital waiting rooms. It was about 4 women raised under the same roof, but shaped by completely different storms. Alex, Teddy, Georgie, Frankie. Their lives were messy and beautiful and sometimes so painfully honest it hurt to watch. It made womanhood feel epic without needing explosions or chase scenes. It showed that quiet resilience was just as cinematic as any courtroom twist or dramatic finale. The sisters fought, forgave, failed, and still came back to the table, and that felt revolutionary. It honored the kind of emotional labor that rarely gets screen time, and it made you feel less alone in your own chaos. And maybe that is why it slipped through the cracks. Because Sisters made you feel too much. It made you sit with feelings that did not fit neatly into sitcoms or dramas. It was about womanhood without cliches, and sisterhood without saccharine filters. It tackled addiction, betrayal, infertility, divorce, and love. Deep, complicated, blood-deep love. And like real life, there were no perfect resolutions. Just people trying to show up for each other again and again. Today, people praise prestige television for doing what Sisters did decades ago. But it never got its credit, never got its renaissance. It is like a handwritten letter buried in a drawer, personal, imperfect, unforgettable. And it deserves to be read again. Chicago Hope never tried to be the hospital show for everyone. It was too intense, too smart, too strange. But it also might have been the most human. Set in a high-pressure surgical center, it focused on brilliant doctors who were just barely holding their lives together. The surgeries were dramatic, sure. But the true drama came when the masks came off. When the show leaned into grief, failure, mental illness, and quiet breakdowns hidden behind pagers and white coats. Mandy Patinkin, Adam Arkin, Christine Lottie. Their performances were not clean. They were jagged, hurting, alive. It did not shy away from the ethical murk of medicine. It dove straight into it. These were not perfect people saving lives. They were flawed humans desperately trying to stay afloat. The pressure, the regret, the quiet guilt, they all bled through every line of dialogue. It showed that healing others does not mean you are healed yourself, and sometimes that truth hits hardest. This was not a procedural with feel-good endings. It was a peek into what happens when healing people starts to destroy you. For a while, it was a critical darling. But as ER exploded and the medical genre got slicker, Chicago Hope was quietly pushed aside. It was too intimate, too raw, too focused on the emotional aftermath, and so it became a footnote. But anyone who watched it will tell you, it never played it safe. And sometimes the shows that cut the deepest are the ones we try hardest to forget. Northern Exposure was never meant to work. A New York doctor stranded in a tiny Alaskan town full of eccentrics? It sounded like a one-joke premise. But then something magical happened. The show stopped being about a doctor and started being about everything. Mortality, article culture, loneliness, moose sightings. It was whimsical and philosophical, funny and aching. One minute, you were watching a radio DJ wax poetic about quantum physics. The next, you were tearing up over a lost love buried in the snow. Joel Fleischman, the reluctant outsider, slowly learned that community was not something you planned. It just happened. To you, through you. It was television that asked questions instead of answering them, and trusted you to sit with the silence. The town of Sicily felt like a character itself, alive with contradiction, warmth, and eerie beauty. It blurred the lines between realism and dream logic, and somehow, it always felt honest. You did not just watch the show, you felt like you had lived there. Northern Exposure captured a very specific kind of melancholy joy, the feeling of being completely out of place and slowly falling in love with that fact. But like the town of Sicily itself, it was hard to reach, hard to define. Eventually, the writing changed, the cast drifted, and the show faded like a dream you almost remember. It was not made to last, but it was made to matter. And somewhere in the frozen quiet of pop culture history, it still does. Party of Five did not start with a bang. It started with silence. The kind of silence that fills a house after loss, the kind that does not go away. 5 siblings, 1 phone call, 2 dead parents. And suddenly, the entire shape of their lives changed. What followed was not some glossy soap opera, but a tender, messy, and unflinchingly honest story about grief, responsibility, and growing up too fast. Charlie had to become a father when he still did not know how to be a man. Bailey wrestled with guilt and addiction. Julia was smart but broken. Claudia was too young to carry the weight she did. And Owen, well, he would never remember the world before it all fell apart. It was a story told in long pauses and heavy silences, where even smiles felt like borrowed time. You could feel the weight of every choice, every mistake, every time someone tried to be strong and failed. It did not hand out wisdom. It earned it through struggle and scars. And for those watching, it felt like someone was finally telling the truth about what it means to survive. Party of Five was never about perfect moments. It was about what came after, the quiet aftershocks of tragedy, the little victories that no one clapped for, and the love that grew in the absence of structure. It challenged the myth of the strong American family by showing us what strength actually looked like. Surviving, choosing to stay, failing, and still coming back. It was not afraid of sadness. In fact, it lived there. And maybe that is why it never quite got the mainstream glory of some of its peers. It was too raw, too slow-burning, too honest. But if you watched it, it got inside you. Because everyone at some point knows what it is like to feel like the adult in the room before you are ready. Everyone has felt like they are barely holding the pieces together while the world expects a smile. Over time, the show faded into quiet memory. You do not see reboots, no major anniversaries, just a generation that quietly carries it in their hearts. Proof that family is not what you are given, it is what you fight for. My So-Called Life only lasted one season. That is it, 19 episodes. And yet, it became the defining voice of a generation. It did not scream, it whispered. And in that whisper, it said everything teenagers had been waiting to hear. Angela Chase was not a hero. She was awkward, impulsive, confused. She dyed her hair red and questioned everything: her parents, her friends, her faith, her worth. She was real. So real that it almost hurt to watch. It captured the mess of adolescence in a way no show ever had before. Beautiful, raw, and unbearably close to home. You did not feel like you were watching a story unfold. You felt like you were remembering something you lived. Every line of dialogue was a quiet confession, and every silence was louder than any scream. It did not try to fix the pain of being a teenager, it just gave it space to exist. This was not the teen drama where every line was a punchline and every problem wrapped up in 30 minutes. It was jagged, honest, even uncomfortable. It gave space to depression, queerness, substance abuse, and that endless ache to be seen. Jordan Catalano was not some ideal boyfriend. He was a mirror of all the wrong people we wanted to believe were right. And still, you rooted for him, because My So-Called Life did not give you characters. It gave you reflections. You did not watch Angela. You were Angela. And yet, the show vanished. Not because it failed, but because the world was not ready. Too raw, too subtle. Not flashy enough for advertisers, not escapist enough for prime time. It disappeared like a secret diary shoved under a mattress, and we have been trying to write it again ever since. Every so-called gritty teen show since owes it a debt. But none of them have touched what it did with a single look, a single breath, a single whispered monologue that sounded like it came straight from your own mind. Maybe that is why it still stings. Because it was ours. And we did not get to keep it. Freaks and Geeks was never about popularity. It was about the people popularity forgets. The burnouts in the parking lot, the kids eating lunch alone, the quiet ones trying to disappear into their hoodies. It was set in the 1980s, but the ache it captured was timeless. A high school dramedy that did not flinch, did not clean up the mess, just let it sit there. Lindsay Weir, the smart girl turned rebel trying to figure out what rebellion actually meant, her little brother Sam navigating the cruel jungle of freshman year, and a cast of characters who were never jokes, they were real. Daniel was not just a bad boy, he was a kid carrying more than he could say. Kim was not just angry, she was exhausted. And the geeks? They were us, honest, anxious, funny in that way that made your heart hurt. It understood that being a teenager is not one big tragedy or one big win. It is both, layered and messy and real. It was not about the moment you figured it all out. It was about the 100 moments before that, where you felt completely lost. And it showed that the people we overlook are often the ones who see the world the clearest. The show was filled with moments that did not try to be big, just true. Like a failed kiss, a disappointed parent, a friend who stops talking to you and never really says why. Freaks and Geeks did not tie things up in neat arcs. It just let life happen. And that is why it failed, at least by network standards. Too quiet, too real. It only lasted 18 episodes. But those 18 were perfect. It has since become a cult classic. Launched careers, inspired scripts. But there is still something bittersweet about it. Because it should have lasted longer. Because we were not done watching those kids figure themselves out. And maybe, because deep down, we were not done figuring ourselves out either. The Sentinel did not just give us a crime show. It gave us a man haunted by his own senses. A former soldier turned police detective with hyper-awareness of the world. He could hear a conversation across the street, smell a lie before it was spoken, track a killer through a single thread of fabric. But this was not a gift. It was a burden, a curse wrapped in heightened instincts. Jim Ellison was not just solving crimes. He was fighting to keep himself from drowning in the flood of noise that the world had become. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of light. It overwhelmed him. That is where Blair Sandberg came in, a grad student who saw in Jim something rare and maybe sacred. Together, they were not just a team. They were a balance, instinct and intellect, grit and curiosity, and every case they solved felt like one more day bought against the weight of his own unraveling. The Sentinel was not perfect, but it was different, and it carved out a place for people who liked their heroes complicated, broken even. The show played with action, sure, but at its core, it was about what happens when being a hero starts to tear you apart from the inside. It never got the credit it deserved. It was eclipsed by shows with bigger budgets, more mainstream appeal. And yet, it stayed with people. Those who watched it never forgot that feeling of tuning into a world so loud it made your bones hurt. We live in a time now where sensory overload is constant. And suddenly, the Sentinel does not feel so far-fetched. Maybe that is why it still lingers, like an echo only a few of us can still hear. Prophet was not just ahead of its time, it felt like it had fallen in from another dimension. Airing briefly in 1996, the show followed Jim Prophet, a cold, calculating corporate executive who manipulated everyone around him to rise through the ranks. He slept in a cardboard box, spoke directly to the camera, and treated his job like a game of psychological warfare. Audiences did not know what to make of it. This was the same decade that gave us Friends and Frasier, shows built on warmth, laughter, and ensemble charm. Prophet was the opposite. It was cold, cynical, and daring. Too daring. It was canceled after only a few episodes, with critics divided and networks scared. He was the snake in the boardroom, charismatic, empty-eyed, and terrifyingly believable. The show didn't just critique capitalism, it made you feel complicit in it. It asked the kind of questions no one wanted to answer, especially during prime time. But years later, something strange happened. Prophet developed a cult following. People began to see it as the prototype for the morally ambiguous anti-heroes who would define television in the 2000s. Characters like Tony Soprano, Don Draper, and Walter White. In hindsight, it was not just edgy for the sake of it. It was visionary. The show explored themes of corporate corruption, trauma, and identity with unsettling depth. And Adrian Pazdar's performance as Prophet remains chilling and magnetic. It was television holding up a mirror to ambition and daring us not to look away. But in 1996, America blinked, and the show was gone. Still, the mark it left has never fully faded. There are certain shows that live in the very bones of American pop culture, and The Ed Sullivan Show is one of them. It ran for over 2 decades, from 1948 to 1971, and if you watched television on a Sunday night during those years, chances are Ed Sullivan was part of your weekly rhythm. It was a variety show, yes, but calling it just that feels too small. It was where America saw the Beatles for the first time. It was where Elvis Presley became dangerous, where ventriloquists, dancers, comedians, and opera singers somehow all fit under one spotlight. Ed Sullivan himself was famously stiff, famously awkward, and somehow perfect. He introduced the country to new talent with that signature delivery, and he made Sunday night feel like an event. There was a weight to every booking, like he knew it might shape the future. You did not just see stars, you watched them become immortal. Whether it was a shaky stand-up comic or a fresh-faced rock band, Sullivan gave them the biggest stage in America. And in doing so, he gave us permission to fall in love with something new. But time is cruel, and memory is selective. The black and white glow of the Ed Sullivan Show has dimmed over the years, especially for younger generations who grew up in color. They know the names, but not the feeling. They know the clips, but not the build-up. That moment when the whole family leaned in, waiting to see who Ed had lined up next. Now, the footage lives on in compilations and documentaries, and the stage he made legendary is mostly a footnote. But for a time, it was the heartbeat of America's living rooms. Some shows did not just reflect youth, they shaped it. California Dreams was a sun-soaked Surfside time capsule of teenage life in the early 1990s. It followed a group of high school friends who formed a band, chasing stardom while juggling friendship, heartbreak, homework, and everything in between. The setting was always golden, the skies always blue, but the emotions hit deep. Every episode felt like a page out of a diary someone forgot to lock. Behind the catchy guitar riffs and pop lyrics, this was a show about change, about how friendships bend under pressure, how dreams evolve, and how growing up always means leaving something behind. The characters, from Jake's cool loner persona to Tiffany's grounded kindness, were more than tropes. They were reflections of us. They made mistakes, chased the wrong people, fought over the wrong things, and then picked up the pieces, sometimes with a song, sometimes with silence. California Dreams offered a vision of youth that was both dreamy and devastating. It made you want to learn guitar. It made you want to call your friends. It made you wonder if high school was really just a stage for a story you might not fully appreciate until it is over. The show ended after 4 years, not with a bang, but a quiet fade. It was gone before most people realized how much it mattered. Now it lives as a soft echo from the corner of nostalgia, waiting for someone to remember how it felt to watch young people sing their hearts out while the tide rolled in behind them. Beauty and the Beast was a fairy tale set in a world of concrete and shadows. From 1987 to 1990, it told the story of Catherine, a lawyer in New York City, and Vincent, a noble beast living beneath the streets in a hidden world. Linda Hamilton brought strength to Catherine, while Ron Perlman, under layers of prosthetics, gave Vincent a quiet, poetic soul. Their love was forbidden, impossible, and entirely real. The show combined crime drama with fantasy, romance with action. It should not have worked, but it did. It spoke to something deep in its audience, a longing for connection in a world that felt increasingly cold. The underground world Vincent lived in was not just a fantasy setting, it was a metaphor for safety, for community, for a different kind of beauty. The show whispered that love could exist without conditions, without judgment, even without surface-level attraction. It did not mock emotion. It embraced it like something sacred. And in doing so, it gave viewers permission to believe in gentleness, even in a brutal world. Beauty and the Beast earned a devoted fan base, one that continues to cherish the show today. But in the mainstream, it has faded. Newer generations barely know it existed, and that is a shame, because for all its melodrama and mythical flourishes, it was sincere. It believed in love without irony. It dared to show vulnerability in a genre that often avoided it. Cop Rock may be one of the strangest experiments ever aired on network television. Premiering in 1990, it was an audacious fusion of gritty police drama and full-blown Broadway musical. Imagine officers discussing a brutal arrest and then breaking into a choreographed song about the criminal justice system. That was the show. It was created by Steven Bochco, the mind behind acclaimed dramas like Hill Street Blues and NYPD Blue. And maybe that was the problem. Audiences expected hard-hitting realism, not musical numbers performed in a courtroom. The shift was jarring. Each week, viewers were asked to suspend belief not just for a case, but for a genre. One minute, a detective was interrogating a suspect, and the next, a gospel choir was singing about corruption. It wasn't satire, it wasn't camp, it was earnest, and that confused people even more. The show wasn't trying to be funny, it was trying to be groundbreaking. The songs were sometimes moving, often bizarre, and always unexpected. Critics did not know what to make of it. Some called it brave, others called it a disaster. Most just stared, baffled. Ratings tanked. After 11 episodes, it was gone. But in that brief, bewildering season, something bold happened. Cop Rock tried to do what no show had done before, or has done since. It blurred the lines between storytelling and spectacle, and it refused to apologize for it. Today, it's often mocked, sometimes defended, but rarely forgotten by those who saw it. It was television taking a huge swing, and sure, it missed. But it swung. And in a world of safe formulas and endless reboots, that matters. Some shows are just too weird and wonderful to survive. The Adventures of Briscoe County, Jr. was one of them. Imagine a show that mixed cowboy shootouts with futuristic science fiction, where a Harvard-educated bounty hunter rode horseback through the Wild West, chasing outlaws and ancient alien technology. It should not have worked, but somehow it did. Bruce Campbell's Briscoe was charming, sharp, and oddly philosophical for a man in spurs. The tone was part Western, part comic book, and part pulp serial, and all heart. It winked at the camera, but never lost its soul. There were glowing orbs, steampunk gadgets, and a subplot about time-traveling artifacts that felt wildly out of place, and yet completely right. It was not just about justice, it was about belief. Belief in progress, in legacy, in the idea that even the Wild West had a future worth dreaming of. But television did not know what to do with it. The ratings were decent, the fan base was devoted, but it was too different, too out there. After one season, it was gone. One of the most original shows of the 1990s disappeared into the void while the world chose safer stories. Now, it lives on in whispers, on fan forums, in dusty DVD collections, in the memories of those who knew television had stumbled upon something special and let it slip away. Briscoe County was ahead of its time. Maybe that was the problem. Or maybe the real adventure was just getting to see it at all. The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis was not your average teenage sitcom. It aired from 1959 to 1963 and had one of the most unique voices of its time. This was a show about a lovesick young man who talked directly to the camera, breaking the fourth wall long before it became a storytelling trend. Dobie was charming, hopelessly romantic, and always entangled in some absurd scheme to win over the girl of the week. But what made the show stand out even more was the presence of Maynard G. Krebs, played by Bob Denver, a beatnik sidekick who recoiled at the word work and became a cultural icon in his own right. The show was funny, sharp, and smarter than it often got credit for. It touched on real themes of class, ambition, and teenage rebellion, all wrapped in a light-hearted, lovable package. Dobie wasn't a rebel or a genius. He was something rarer, a sincere dreamer. He wanted love, he wanted meaning, and he wanted it without irony. It was the first time television said it was okay to be awkward, poetic, and hopeful at once. And it let teenagers be foolish without making them the punchline. It gave American youth a voice, an oddball voice maybe, but a voice nonetheless. Over time, though, it was overtaken by louder, brighter comedies and the rise of more dramatic fare. Dobie faded into the background, his monologues forgotten, his daydreams replaced by different kinds of heroes. But if you watched it, really watched it, you remember the warmth, the honesty, the way it made being young feel both ridiculous and profound. The 20th Century Fox Hour was a short-lived attempt to bridge the golden age of cinema with the golden glow of television. Running from 1955 to 1957, it was an anthology series that adapted well-known films and original stories into hour-long television dramas. It was elegant, it was cinematic. It tried to carry the weight of the studio's name on its back and bring it straight into your living room. Each episode had a familiar polish to it, like watching a condensed movie but with all the grandeur still intact. Famous stories were trimmed down to fit into 60 minutes, and new dramas tried their best to live up to the brand that preceded them. Some succeeded, some did not. But even when it missed with grace. The lighting, the music, the framing, it all felt like a miniature film festival delivered to your living room. You did not watch it to laugh or relax, you watched it to watch. It reminded people that television could be art, not just noise. But every Sunday, viewers knew they were getting something a little more refined, a little more serious. In a world of variety shows and slapstick, the 20th Century Fox Hour felt like a whisper from the movie theater down the street. It was classy without being cold, dramatic without being dull. But the formula proved hard to sustain. The rise of sitcoms, westerns, and science fiction made its slower pacing feel out of step. Eventually, it quietly faded, unable to compete with the flashier new kids on the block. But it left behind a strange elegance, a kind of dignity that other shows rarely aimed for. It was one of those shows that should have faded into parody, but somehow carved out a place in America's living rooms, and never really left. The Beverly Hillbillies followed the Clampett family, simple folks from the Ozarks who struck oil and suddenly found themselves living in a Beverly Hills mansion they could not understand, surrounded by wealth they never asked for. The comedy was obvious, their backward ways clashing with the glittering absurdity of high society. But beneath the laughs was something quieter, something almost tragic. This was a story about people who never quite fit in, no matter how big their bank account got. Jed Clampett, the soft-spoken patriarch, always seemed like he was looking for something he had lost, even as the world laughed around him. Granny's wild wisdom and Ellie Mae's innocence made them caricatures on the surface, but real to anyone who knew what it meant to be treated like a joke just for being different. And America watched, week after week, because it reminded us that not every outsider is looking to blend in. But then, just like that, the Clampetts were gone. One day they were gracing prime time, the next they were a punchline, buried beneath newer shows with shinier backdrops and faster jokes. The laugh track stopped, and no one asked why. Today, the Beverly Hillbillies exists mostly in rerun limbo, a relic with a twang, treated like a fossil of a simpler time. But if you remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet, watching Granny try to make moonshine in a millionaire's kitchen, then you remember what television used to be. Odd, imperfect, human. And sometimes, that was exactly what made it so rich. Out of This World was the kind of show that could only exist in the 80s. A sitcom about a teenage girl who discovers on her 13th birthday that her father is an alien and she has supernatural powers. That sounds like something you'd find in the last row of a dusty VHS bargain bin, and honestly, that's the charm. This show somehow managed to blend heartwarming family moments, slapstick comedy, and intergalactic weirdness, all in one neon-washed package. It aired in syndication, which meant it never had a consistent time slot, but Sundays were a regular go-to in a lot of local markets. The lead character, Evie, had the power to freeze time by touching her index fingers together, a trick that was used so often it became one of the most recognizable gags of the show. The real kicker? Her alien dad, who you never actually saw, spoke to her through a glowing cube and was voiced by Burt Reynolds. Yes, that Burt Reynolds. It ran for 4 seasons, but because it was never a network darling and never had rerun deals, it kind of disappeared once the final episode aired. Ask anyone who remembers it and they'll light up with nostalgia, then immediately question if it was a dream. It was campy. It was bizarre. And it was something truly, uniquely 80s. out of this world might have vanished from the spotlight, but for those who saw it, it never left their memories. The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis was not your average teenage sitcom. It aired from 1959 to 1963 and had one of the most unique voices of its time. This was a show about a lovesick young man who talked directly to the camera, breaking the fourth wall long before it became a storytelling trend. Dobie was charming, hopelessly romantic, and always entangled in some absurd scheme to win over the girl of the week. But what made the show stand out even more was the presence of Maynard G. Krebs, played by Bob Denver, a beatnik sidekick who recoiled at the word work and became a cultural icon in his own right. The show was funny, sharp, and smarter than it often got credit for. It touched on real themes of class, ambition, and teenage rebellion, all wrapped in a light-hearted, lovable package. Dobie wasn't a rebel or a genius. He was something rarer, a sincere dreamer. He wanted love, he wanted meaning, and he wanted it without irony. It was the first time television said it was okay to be awkward, poetic, and hopeful at once. And it let teenagers be foolish without making them the punchline. It gave American youth a voice, an oddball voice maybe, but a voice nonetheless. Over time, though, it was overtaken by louder, brighter comedies and the rise of more dramatic fare. Dobie faded into the background, his monologues forgotten, his daydreams replaced by different kinds of heroes. But if you watched it, really watched it, you remember the warmth, the honesty, the way it made being young feel both ridiculous and profound. Some shows lasted long enough to become legends. Salute Your Shorts only needed one season. Set in Camp Anawanna, this scrappy little series captured the chaos, laughter, and bittersweet awkwardness of summer camp better than anything before or since. It was loud, it was messy, it was perfect. Every episode was a snapshot of friendship forged in bug spray and bad cafeteria food. You had Donkey Lips, the lovable underdog; Budnick, the rule-breaking prankster with a hidden soft side; Dina, Sponge. They were not polished or pretty. They were real. Kids who wore mismatched socks, fought over bunk beds, and stayed up too late daring each other to sneak into the woods. But what made Salute Your Shorts stick was its honesty. It understood that camp is more than canoe races and ghost stories. It is where kids first learn how to be away from home, how to find your place, how to fall in and out of crushes and feel like the world is ending over a lost flashlight. It was funny, yes, but also deeply nostalgic. Even as it aired, it felt like something already gone. Maybe that is why it ended so quickly. It burned too bright. Networks wanted polish. What they got was heart. Now it survives in memory, in campfire smoke and the sound of a distant whistle, in the way the theme song still gets stuck in your head out of nowhere. For those who remember, Salute Your Shorts was more than just a show. It was a summer that never really ended. There are certain shows that live in the very bones of American pop culture, and The Ed Sullivan Show is one of them. It ran for over 2 decades, from 1948 to 1971, and if you watched television on a Sunday night during those years, chances are Ed Sullivan was part of your weekly rhythm. It was a variety show, yes, but calling it just that feels too small. It was where America saw the Beatles for the first time. It was where Elvis Presley became dangerous, where ventriloquists, dancers, comedians, and opera singers somehow all fit under one spotlight. Ed Sullivan himself was famously stiff, famously awkward, and somehow perfect. He introduced the country to new talent with that signature delivery, and he made Sunday night feel like an event. There was a weight to every booking, like he knew it might shape the future. You did not just see stars, you watched them become immortal. Whether it was a shaky stand-up comic or a fresh-faced rock band, Sullivan gave them the biggest stage in America. And in doing so, he gave us permission to fall in love with something new. But time is cruel, and memory is selective. The black and white glow of The Ed Sullivan Show has dimmed over the years, especially for younger generations who grew up in color. They know the names, but not the feeling. They know the clips, but not the build-up. That moment when the whole family leaned in, waiting to see who Ed had lined up next. Now, the footage lives on in compilations and documentaries, and the stage he made legendary is mostly a footnote. But for a time, it was the heartbeat of America's living rooms. The Bigelow Theater was one of those brief glimmers in television history that seemed to burn too brightly and too fast. Airing from 1950 to 1951, it lived a strange dual life, first as a CBS anthology drama and later repackaged for Dumont under various names. At its core, it was a stage for stories, real ones, deep ones, sometimes even a little too ambitious for their times. Each episode was a self-contained play, complete with rising tension and dramatic conclusions that tried to stretch the television format beyond its early limits. But here's what sets it apart: the talent it attracted. A young James Dean appeared on it before he became legend. George C. Scott showed up long before anyone called him iconic. For one brief, shining moment, the Bigelow Theater was a springboard for greatness. It was the kind of show that didn't just cast actors, it captured them at the edge of becoming icons. There was a rawness in the performances, a feeling that no one quite knew they were making history. Every episode felt like a rehearsal for something much bigger, but no less sincere. And because of that, it became a quiet archive of American talent right before it exploded. But it never quite caught the public's imagination in the way its network hoped. It lacked flash. It asked its viewers to pay attention, to feel something. That was a lot to ask from a post-war America that just wanted to laugh or sing. And so it faded, quietly, almost politely, into television's attic of forgotten names. But those performances, those early, trembling moments of greatness, they remain buried in dusty kinescopes, just waiting for someone to remember. If you grew up in the 1990s, this show was like the cool older cousin who always knew what was up, but still made time to help you with your homework. Hangin' with Mr. Cooper followed Mark Cooper, a former professional basketball player turned high school teacher who used humor, honesty, and a whole lot of heart to guide kids through school and life. Played by Mark Curry, he was the kind of teacher everyone wished they had. He cracked jokes but never dodged the real stuff. He called it like he saw it. He cared. But the show was not just about Cooper. It was about a house filled with friends, family, and the messy love that holds them together. Vanessa, his confident and hilarious roommate, brought sass and style. Geneva and young Nicole added warmth and relatability. They all lived together, stumbled together, and picked each other up when the world got rough. It felt like family, even if it was not traditional. What made Mr. Cooper stand out was how seamlessly it blended life lessons with laughs. It dealt with serious issues, peer pressure, racism, disappointment, without ever getting preachy. And it never forgot to have fun along the way. For 5 solid years, it was a staple of the family night lineup. Then it was gone, quietly shuffled off the schedule, with little fanfare and less reason. The reruns dried up. The impact did not. Hangin' with Mr. Cooper was one of the last sitcoms that felt like it cared about kids and adults at the same time. And for many of us, that kind of care was rare. It's a Living had a simple premise: 6 waitresses working at a swanky restaurant on top of a Los Angeles skyscraper, juggling tips, tough customers, and each other. It ran for nearly a decade, first on ABC and then in syndication, from 1980 to 1989. But despite its long life, it somehow fell through the cracks of television history. Maybe it was because the cast changed more than once. Maybe it was because people did not know how to market a show that was about working women, but not as flashy as Charlie's Angels or as dramatic as Dynasty. It was funny, it was sharp, and it gave voice to the struggles of service workers in a way few sitcoms ever have. These were not rich characters. They were real. They clocked in tired, left exhausted, and still found reasons to laugh in between. Each joke landed because it came from a place of lived-in truth, not punchline formulas. The show was less about drama and more about dignity. They argued, supported each other, and occasionally broke down in the break room. The comedy came from the grind, the awkward tables, the demanding guests, the tired feet. And while it had plenty of laughs, it never made fun of their lives. It respected them. That quiet dignity is why It's a Living still resonates with the people who remember it. But syndication does strange things to memory. Shows become familiar, but fuzzy, important, but unspecific. It lived in reruns and then disappeared. And now, it is a name people say with a vague sense of recognition, like something they dreamed about once. But behind that name was something brave, something real, something that showed working women without glamour, but with grit. If one of these shows hit home, drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe to keep the memories alive.